Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga. There. For this morning, let me share with you how you can optimize your cybersecurity outcomes. So what we want to do today with cybersecurity is, to think like a threat actor to be able to protect our organizations. And coming from Brian's presentation earlier, we want to move away from maturity model to risk-based model. And this is what I'll be talking about this morning. So why are breaches still occurring and increasing at an accelerated rate? So why are still there breaches if we have a bunch of security companies, security vendors, helping organizations to protect their business? It is because we have lack of security posture across the whole cybersecurity attack surface. So when we talk about the cybersecurity attack surface, we want to be able to have visibility. And the sad part is most organizations do not really have full visibility of their attack surface. So when we talk about attack surface, it is not just the infrastructure like your servers, your endpoint, your email, your network, but it also talks about your identities, your SaaS applications, and we have cloud nowadays, and of course, IoT devices as well. All these are part of the attack surface of every organization. And aside from the cyber assets that we talk about, to be able to gain visibility, of course, we need to be able to assess what are the vulnerabilities involved, what are the exploits that could possibly be done on your cyber assets. And of course, the likelihood of being exploited or attacked and the impact. We have to look into all of this when we talk about the attack surface nowadays. And based on statistics, 82% of breaches actually starts with an identity compromise. I think that is also the reason why identity detection and response has become one of the technologies or key technologies that is included when we talk about XDR, extended detection and response. And as I have mentioned, if you don't have visibility of your whole attack surface, it is very difficult to protect it because based on this number, around 70% of organizations that has been compromised is actually because of an unknown or unmanaged or a poorly managed internet-facing assets. And lastly, based on our statistics, so 52% of those organizations who went to TRENDMICRO for incident response assistance actually starts with a phishing attack. So let us quickly take a look at the threat actor evolution. So we have the cyber criminals who have actually resulted to extortion, BEC, business email compromise, as we all know, is still here. Economic headwinds, of course, driving more crime, more cybercrime, and of course, increased specialization and customization when we talk about threats. Aside from that, let's not forget, nation-state actors will always be there, and of course, the cyber criminal insiders, or the insiders, which has always been part of the cyber attack surface. So let's also take a look into the threat activity evolution. This is normally how a cyber attack is being conducted and how it becomes very successful. So we have here from initial access, so it's either through a phishing email or through a vulnerability. So those are the top two targets, top two threat vectors, phishing email and vulnerabilities. And of course, we also have what we call the open source and supply chain exploitation, which we have seen from the past maybe 2 to 3 years, supply chain attacks. And using all of these attack vectors, of course, they will move laterally, trying to avoid your endpoint protection solutions, your EDR solutions, or whatever security solutions you have in place. And of course, for supply chain attacks, taking advantage of leaving off the land techniques, wherein they will actually use tools that are actually legal, that are officially part of your organization, so that it will not be detected. And of course, lastly is perform exfiltration with the help of encryption as well. So how do we move? So as I've mentioned, the maturity model mentioned by Brian in his presentation. So we want to move into risk-based, diba? So talking about risk-based, we want to move also from reactive to proactive. So how can we be proactive when we talk about cybersecurity? So here we have attack surface risk management. It basically has 3 simple steps. So discover your attack surface, know what all your cyber assets are, assess and prioritize your risk, and lastly, of course, one of the main goals is to mitigate risk, overall risk for your organization. So how do we do that? First is we need to eliminate the blind spots. Aside from having sensors on your endpoints, visibility on your managed devices, we need to be able to gain visibility as well on those unmanaged devices. And of course, that is where, let's say, network sensors will come in, and of course, other IoT sensors as well. So for each and every application, or servers, or hardware, SaaS, cloud, everything that is part of your cyber assets needs to be fully discovered, and you need to gain visibility on that. So once you have visibility on that, what we need to do then is to be able to assess, provide a risk scoring for each and every asset in your organization, including your employees. So imagine all of your employees has a risk score on top of their identities. So with this risk score, we are able to actually tell, like for example here, we have domain controller with misconfigured security configuration. We have a high risk for that, 94. But let's take a look at a normal workstation. It doesn't have a privileged access, it's owned by a regular employee, will have a lower risk score. So there's a computation. Aside from that, for example, we have credential dumping activity, and then we have a high risk score for that. Likely compromised or low privilege identity, we will have a lower risk scoring for that. So basically, we'll have a risk score for each and every identity, each and every server, endpoint, email address, application that is in your environment. So now that we have a risk score for that, we are able to understand what are the risks involved and what is the exposure. How likely will this endpoint or will this user be exploited based on his profile? So lastly is basically, of course, to reduce the risk. The overall goal is basically reduce risk so that we minimize attack, we minimize or we eliminate successful attacks in the future. So how do we do that? So you need to have a goal. So you can set a goal, like for example, if you want to reduce the overall risk, what are the things that needs to be done? So based on the security posture, you know your risks. Then next is, what's your goal? What are the things that you need to fix? So it's logical, right? So for example, if you see there's a lot of vulnerabilities on critical servers, then of course you know you need to fix those vulnerabilities. So I'd like to take it back again to one of the presentations where in risk-based approach, we don't just like, most of the organizations nowadays, they want to implement, okay, I want SOC, I want zero trust, I want all of this. But is it part of your company's risk? So let's take a look back, like what's your risk? And this is what we try to fix, we remediate, okay? So aside from that, from the risk mitigation level, we also have playbooks. So you have playbooks in place, your own organization would have processes involved, you have your own patch management system, for example, you have your change management process. All of this are part of the process or playbooks that you can build for your own company or your own organization, whether it's manual or through a tool or a platform. So again, the attack surface risk management revolves on these 3 key steps: discover, assess, and prioritize, and of course, lastly, is risk mitigation. Now, with proactive security and the attack surface risk management, so again, the first part, discover your whole attack surface. So just to summarize it, so you have your SaaS applications, your cloud assets, again, endpoint, servers, email. And aside from that, the second part would be proprietary cyber risk quantification to be able to help you in your risk-based decisions. So provide a risk scoring for each and every cyber asset in your company. And of course, lastly is to prioritize and mitigate. And then of course, if you have your own zero trust, if you have zero trust solutions in place, that can also be part of the whole life cycle. Okay, attack surface risk management, XDR, zero trust. That all works together to complete the whole cybersecurity life cycle. So how do we do attack surface risk management? So what are the criteria to be able to compute the risk level? So as I've mentioned, there are different risk scoring for each identity. There are different risk scoring for each asset. So what do we see? What do we look into? So the first one would be vulnerability exposure. So with vulnerability exposure, we look into if there are any misconfiguration. Vulnerabilities basically suspicious activity and suspicious data access. And then aside from that, we also look into the security configuration. Is the endpoint protection and EDR solution, are they enabled? Are you using legacy operating systems? Are you using lower version of the agent? Or are you using any configurations that is not part of the best practices? And of course, lastly, is threat activity. So that's why I mentioned that XDR and attack surface risk management actually works together, because if we see threats on this specific endpoints, on this specific servers, or basically cyber assets, that will be part of the overall risk scoring as well. And then, of course, we look into the likelihood of a successful attack and the impact of a successful attack. So why do we look into those? Like, for example, if we are looking at two different workstations, one is owned by a regular IT user and one is owned by, let's say, the CEO. Then, of course, the likelihood of being exploited would be on the CEO. Or the CFO, for example, because we know that financial data would be residing on the workstation, right? Or a regular IT versus an IT admin, then that's another story, di ba? So again, the risk score is also based on the profile of the user. So again, as I've mentioned, XDR and ASRM works together. It's like yin and yang. So attack surface helps you be prepared, proactive, to help you minimize the risk, the overall risk for your organization. And of course, with XDR, you are also able to, it is also able to tell attack surface risk management if there are any high-risk activities. And of course, reducing the alert fatigue for your SOC analysts or your security operations. If, let's say, you reduce the overall risk for your organization, it also means that there are lesser attack or lesser suspicious activities in your environment. And of course, lastly is to improve prioritization. So, for each and every company, our recommendation is basically to shift from, security tools to a cybersecurity platform. Basically, a consolidated approach. So, why are we looking at consolidated approach? So, of course, one is cost savings. But what are the things that you can actually accomplish when you look into platform consolidation? So again, to be able to reduce what we call the siloed cybersecurity. So if you have everything in one single platform, so basically you will not lose the quality of the security, and you also have support from a single vendor. So visibility, so you transform limited visibility to a broad visibility for your whole attack surface. You have a single point of trust when you look into that platform. And of course, lastly is automation and workflow, which is easier because everything is in just one single platform. If anything happens, you look into this single platform, everything is there, and you talk to one single vendor. So aside from that, of course, just to give you some of the benefits when you talk about consolidation. So first, as I've mentioned, is to minimize cost and complexity. So I think it's very evident when it comes to the Philippine businesses. We all want to save costs, and it's very challenging when it comes to cybersecurity projects, diba? I see a lot of that ganyan, yeah. So aside from that, optimize compliance. So being able to meet data sovereignty requirements, compliance framework, obligations, and reduce silos, central visibility. This will really be helpful. One single platform, you don't look into multiple consoles to be able to address a single attack. And of course, improve your threat detection and response strategy. So when it comes to incident response, if there are any successful attacks, again, there's no pointing fingers. And lastly, of course, overall, elevate your cyber resilience or cyber risk. As again mentioned, we always have to look into the risk-based approach as well when you talk about cybersecurity nowadays. So again, consolidation without compromise coming from TRENDMICRO. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we're just here.